Hi, my name's Todd Lowe, and I'm a technical service manager for Envu, for the Green Solutions Team. And before I began working with Envu, I was a USGA agronomist in Florida for 18 years. And in that time, visited a lot of golf courses, gained a lot of great information. And one thing that was really important in my tenure with that organization was we had a difficult year back in 2016. And actually, if I go back even further, we had another El Nino in 1998 where I had a lot of golf course superintendents tell me about it. I joined the organization in 2000, and so my El Nino experience was in 2016. And in that time, we had a lot of golf courses that suffered from the foul weather that we experienced during that year. And we are being reported to have another El Nino this year. And some good news is I just recently learned that there's a 3 out of 10 chance that it's not going to be as bad as the former El Nino in 2016. But in that year, I wrote several articles. We hosted several workshops to explain what was happening to the golf courses throughout Florida. And so when I heard that we were having another El Nino this year, I kind of wanted to get ahead of it and try to help golf courses better weather the storm, if you will. And so for superintendents that might be watching this, hopefully you can gain some good information on what we saw several years ago. Maybe give you some good information to put into newsletters that address your members. And then obviously I would love for as many golfers to be able to see this so that they can learn as to why we need to do what we need to do. And this is a little bit of a departure from my normal, what I do for Envu as far as a technical service manager, but I just felt it was a great idea to kind of help the golf courses out there to kind of weather the storm. And if it's not a bad year, then I think just an explanation sometimes of why we need to do what we need to do on the golf course to provide the very best turf health and playing conditions possible. So what is El Nino? El Nino is that warming of sea surface temperatures in central and east central equatorial Pacific. Okay, what does that mean? Well, as that you can see from that graph there, we get a extended jet stream into the cooler or into the lower parts of the United States, and particularly into the southern states, and ours being the southernmost state there in Florida, and it brings cooler and wetter conditions. And again, as I said, some recent news is it's not going to be as bad, hopefully. We'll have to see, but a 30% chance that it's going to rival the conditions that we saw in 2016. So hope we don't see it, but it's not bad to be prepared for the worst. And to give you a little background as to why wetter conditions are more important in our area, and so just a little diagram there on the left as far as what is evapotranspiration and why is it important. So we get precipitation from rainfall, or we could get water from irrigation system, but water leaves the atmosphere, leaves the soil and the turf canopy through different processes, through both evaporation and transpiration. And when temperatures are high and relative humidity is decent, we have high evapotranspiration rates. And so that diagram there on the right, that just happens to be for my local area in Florida, around the Northport area, and that's a 10-year average. And you can see that our evapotranspiration rates are less than half what they are in November, December, January than what they are in, say, June, July, August timeframe. Because again, we're going to get colder temperatures, and if we have the strong El Nino, we'll have a lot more rainfall. But even if we didn't have a significant amount of rainfall, just the rainfall that we get at that time of year, it doesn't leave quickly. And why is that important? I'll explain some of that here in just a minute. But wanted to show you some historical weather data that we had back in that time, and when I was giving these presentations back in the day, we used this information, and you can see that the yellow bar is a 30-year average of the weather conditions, or I should say the rainfall that occurred from December 1st through January 28th. we were doing these presentations in late January at that time. In 2014, the year before, or I should say 2014 and 2015 for the winter season, you can see that we received about 2.81 inches of rainfall that occurred over a 17-day window. So kind of the normal days of rainfall was kind of met the average, but a much less rate that we had received than the year prior. But fast forward to the next year, and that's 2015, 2016, you can see we got nearly 2.5 times the amount of rainfall that occurred over 39 days. And why is that important? Why is the number of days important? Because you have to imagine, when we're getting that rainfall, we're also getting reduced sunlight. Well, why is that important, Todd? Well, because the turf is still growing, albeit much more slowly during the winter months, but it's still green, it's still producing carbohydrates through photosynthesis. It needs the sunlight, and so it's got much fewer days of sunlight, and then not only fewer days, but a lot more rainfall that created saturated conditions within the soil. And then also, we're just normally low temperatures at that time of year, why is that important? Because we are playing on a warm season turf grass. That warm season turf grass needs warm weather to grow appropriately. And when it gets colder, it just stops growing. And then as it gets even colder, it begins to take steps back. And then you throw on the wet conditions and it makes it even less favorable. So what does that mean for putting greens? Well, for putting greens, we began to see turf thinning, turf chlorosis, which just means the yellowing of the turf as that turf loses its chlorophyll. But for the most part, these are the conditions that occurred. Increased disease from saturated soils and increased moisture, surface moisture. Shallower roots, which normally on greens here in our region, we don't have a very deep, robust root system anyway. But then when you fill all that pore space in the soil, you create what we call anaerobic or oxygen-less environments, and those roots really slough off and die off as a result. And then with the saturated conditions and the weaker roots, a lot of the golfers were remarking the number of ball marks and the size of ball marks and the fact that you can't repair them. These are all common issues that occurred back at that time. And here's a picture from one of the golf courses that we hosted one of the workshops at. And, it was this fevered query from the superintendent saying, Todd, I got greens that are just not looking good. And, any more weather, more time with this bad weather, they really could have turned even worse. But, just looking at these conditions, they're not great. And you can even see, down in this bottom right area of the picture where they had to do a little sodding, in fact. But you can see just not looking good on a course in an area that normally stays fairly green in color. You can see just not good at all. But boy, really not as bad as this poor golf course. And here was another course I visited back during that year where it just, unfortunately they had done a regrassing of the putting greens just a few months before, and in a normal winter would have looked just fine. But when we had that prolonged moisture and temperature stress, it really caused some decline in those greens. So, if for nothing else, I really wanted to encourage what needs to be done on golf courses agronomically. And for putting greens, as much as we can increase the mowing heights, we're going to increase root depth. So the higher we mow the turf, the deeper the root system we're going to have. Now, we can only take this so far because at the end of the day, they are putting greens where we need some decent playability and decent speed, because as we mow the turf higher, the speeds are going to decrease. So you will get grumbling, in these fall months from the better players who want the really fast speeds. But if we can communicate to the membership what needs to be done to help weatherproof our greens, I have found there to be a lot less grumbling over healthy greens in January and February versus over dead and dying greens, because there just wasn't the root mass, and then we filled all that pore space with water and no oxygen for those very thin roots. Now, there are practices that we can do, rolling being a good, important practice, lightweight rolling. But we have to watch how much we're doing of that, because even that can injure the turf, not only on the putting green perimeters, but on their collars and surrounds. And so if you can do a little bit more target rolling, which is not going all the way out to the collars, but stopping actually several feet from the perimeters, and that way you put less traffic stress on both the putting green perimeters and the collars. Mower turn boards, are not great because they add a much higher level of work for your maintenance staff. But maybe in January, February, or should even back up if we're having a wet December, even December, January, using turn boards to be able to turn those walk mowers on the areas without creating too much turf stress. Again, I'd rather not use that. It creates a lot more work for your staff, but if it gets bad enough, you might have to consider some of those implements. I like showing pictures like this because I was blessed with that 18-year career, and even nowadays I get to visit courses where you get to see these cross sections of greens, but there's not a lot of golfers and even superintendents that get to see this kind of stuff. And what am I showing here? Well, internal drainage is very important for the game of golf, very important for turf health and playability. And what I'm showing you is a cross-section of USGA spec green, or a putting green that was built according to the USGA recommendations for a root zone. And what it shows is a 4-inch gravel layer on the bottom with 12 inches of root zone mix. And then what you see on top of that is 15 years of organic matter accumulation. And you might look at this picture and go, man, I don't know how turf is actually thriving, but it is, because the superintendent, they built the greens properly and he managed them properly. They just went through an architectural change at this golf course, and I was fortunate enough to be able to come out and take some pictures. But really just want to show you want to build the greens correctly, you want to maintain them properly. If you renovate in the future, you want to do that properly as well, because I'm going to show you some dangers that can lurk below that highly affect internal drainage. And so internal drainage is just an important factor any time of the year, but this is one of the factors that becomes compromised during an El Nino winter, again, as more of that pore space within the soil is taken up by water and not enough oxygen in the pore space, or what we call macropores, is available to provide oxygen to the turf roots. And again, this is especially important or problematic when we have our conditions that have the lower ET and then increased rainfall. And what I wanted to show you through these next series of slides is just the normal progression of organic matter accumulation in our region. And so these are putting greens. This golf course, I think they regrassed in 2000, and so by 2003 they had a good 2 to 3 inches of organic matter built up. They have a decent thatch layer that they're maintaining through good aerification programs in the summer. And so this is a course that I visited each year, and you can see that progression of organic matter accumulation. I also like showing this because there's a lot of golfers that come down to Florida that may have home courses in another region and don't understand why we have to aerify as aggressively as we do down here in Florida, because we have nearly a 12-month growing season in a lot of the southern parts of our region. Here's another golf course that they regrassed putting greens in '99, and you can see that progression of organic matter accumulation in the upper root zone. Why am I even talking about organic matter? Because if you have too much organic matter or highly concentrated organic matter, you're not going to have good percolation through that root system. And so I'm really showing why we have to do what we have to do during the summer months to maintain good soil physical properties. Also showing you different rates of organic matter accumulation. Here's another set of putting greens from another golf course down in South Florida where they didn't have quite the fertility program that the one you saw on the preceding slide. But again, just showing you all golf courses in our region, we accumulate organic matter because we have such a long growing season. And I just kind of want to run through some of these because they really will show themselves during the winter months with our lower evapotranspiration. And what we're looking at here is a golf course that was renovated the year prior. And what they had done, you can see that lower part of the root zone, that was the original root zone mix. They had organic matter accumulated because the greens had grown for a few years before they decided to regrass. And then when they regrass, unfortunately, they left a portion of that lower organic matter. And so water's going to move through that white sandy root zone until it hits that layer, and then from that layer it's going to back up into the root system, or into the root zone mix, into the upper white sand mix. And if you get a heavy downpour, you'll have a higher head and gravity will be able to push that water down and through the root zone. But if it's just a light sprinkling, which is what we kind of normally get in those El Nino times, water just wants to tend to stay locked up due to these layers. Here's another golf course where they left the organic matter intact, and instead of tilling it really, really well, they didn't do a great job at tilling it, and they created those striations of organic matter. And again, water's going to move down with gravity until it hits these layers, and once it hits the layers, it then goes lateral, and it kind of just backs up from there through capillary rise of wherever that water stops back into the root zone. You can even see with this picture, there's a little black layer developing in the left side of that picture in the upper root zone. Here's just another picture similar to the first one, but now you've got several years of growth. You can see the upper 2 inches has more organic matter accumulated. So water's going to go down through a little more slowly through that organic layer. It's going to hit that white sand layer and be able to infiltrate downward. But then it's going to hit that layer that's 4 inches below the surface and then back up even more into that new organic matter layer that's developed since the putting greens were regrassed. Here's a layer that has developed just simply from a very thick layer of sprigs that was provided during the grow-in and that weren't addressed properly with good aerification in that first summer. And so you can create grow-in layers that will cause infiltration issues and even in this case cause fairy ring issues. But we're not going to get into that. This one takes the cake. It's the 5-layer literal cake. It's the 5-layer cake. You can just see multiple issues. At the very bottom, again, is your original root zone mix. They had a little bit of organic matter that had built up, and then they did a regrass where they put in, you can see that new sand layer right on top of the, this organic layer that had built up, and then the white sand layer up above where they had done yet another regrass. And the whole issue really is probably just from this layer right there towards the bottom of that profile. But here they've even created even a newer layer up top with that black soil that came in with the sod, which is another, it's one of the main reasons why sodding isn't great for Bermuda grass putting greens, because you never get rid of that soil layer that comes in with the sod. Here's another cross section, again, just showing you on the one on the left is actually from a golf course that had regrassed, and they left about 2 inches of the organic layer. And for 2 years, always in January, these greens died out. And I could never figure it out because in my profiler, I couldn't reach that organic layer. And so I asked, when they were regrassing, please let me know, because the superintendent had, just was beside himself and said, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to regrass this putting green, just this one, because the rest of the greens were doing fine. And anyway, he gave me a call the day that he was doing it, and it was really interesting to see that layer. And sure enough, that's where you're going to have essentially a mini perched water table, which is what we have by design. By putting in a gravel layer with a root zone mix, you have a perched water table that occurs right at that interface between the gravel and the root zone. But now we've got one that's just 5 inches below the surface of the putting green with this layer that was left behind. And then the picture on the right just shows a mature putting green that's probably 25 years old, and boy, there's just so much going on there. I mean, I don't have enough time. I could probably do this whole presentation on this one slide, but man, you can see a lot of different layers from a lot of different things that took place in the lifespan of this putting green. So it's time, in this case, for this golf course to regrass that green, but to do it right and renovate and go all the way down. But I said all those things to really highlight the importance of internal drainage of that root zone. And there's things that we do in the summer months through normal aerification programs where we remove cores and we backfill them with sand. But also sand injection or dry ejecting has been a really great practice for our region. The picture on the right shows a profile from a green that shows a normal 5/8 inch core, and what we can accomplish with that. It was deep enough to actually penetrate the upper organic layer. But you'll see the width of that. It's probably about a 1/2 inch wide channel, and that right next to it is a channel that was created through dry eject or sand injection. And what I love about it is it really doesn't create much of a surface disruption, a little bit, but not as much as we get with standard aerification programs. Also, just the width of those channels that we can create, so not just sand injection, but another practice that we call drill and fill will give you a similar type of channels that you can create through a mature putting green. But there's practices that we can do during the winter time as well. So those ones I just showed would be summertime practices. But in the wintertime, periodic venting is really great to help reduce soil compaction and help increase oxygen exchange to the root system. And research shows that we can get about 3 weeks worth of compaction relief from normal venting. So in a normal winter, I've always recommended if you can vent those greens every 3 to 4 weeks, great. In this type of winter, we are going to get the extended periods of rainfall and soil saturation, we might want to look to move that frequency up to maybe every 2 weeks. And what I love about venting is, I took this picture where he had just top dressed so that we could see the holes. But when we do this in the winter months on grass that's just normally grown without the sand top dressing, you really don't see the vent holes. So you can play right over this practice, after a nice lightweight rolling afterwards, and it doesn't seal the holes back up. It does help relieve that compaction, which is important for our peak winter play season. I've talked a lot about internal drainage, but surface drainage is just as important. And so areas that we have where surface flow is wanting to move downward across the surface, but there's some type of increase in elevation, it usually occurs along the collar edge. And there's a reason why. Because our ultra dwarf greens, we do a lot of sand top dressing, which is really great for both plant health and playability. But the downside is, when mowers turn 2 and 3 days after top dressing, what happens is they deposit more sand along those collars. And there's a reason why we send mowers out with what we call dew whips. They're like large cane poles, and it's to knock those little sand piles down. So we don't think about it, but we actually are top dressing our collars probably at 3x the rate than we do our putting greens. And as a result, you get these sand dams, we call them, that build up that restrict surface flow off of a putting green. And so you can have exaggerated soil saturation problems in those areas where water is wanting to flow off of the green, but it's being restricted, as this picture shows. And there's some things you can do in the summer months to get after this collar sand dams that build up, and whether you're using a sod cutter or other practices. So I guess I talk about some of the things we do in the summer months, which creates quite a surface quality issue. Nobody likes seeing things that are scalped up, but there's a reason why we do it. And here's a great picture showing, why we do some of those aggressive measures on collars. Trees are great things to have on golf courses. They really are. They add great structure to wildlife. They really can help frame holes nicely. They're just great little aesthetic features and nice environmental features. However, on areas where you've got low mode playing surfaces like putting greens, boy, they can really wreak havoc on the stress of that green. In this picture, you can see the back perimeter is just really thin and off color. It's much worse when you get up on it. And the superintendent, these are live oaks. The superintendent tried to do everything possible to get as much sunlight through just normal pruning. and he got a A for enhancing air circulation, because that's another problem that trees have, especially when you have homes behind them, and when you have greens with reduced airflow, you can really have some stress on those greens. So you get an A for that, but unfortunately you get a big F for the amount of sunlight that is now reaching those greens. Trees will always win against turf because they have the advantage of being able to grow tall. And so physiologically, what's happening when a sunlight goes through a leaf, whether it's any type of plant, but trees in this case, so the sunlight is going through, the plants are absorbing the spectrum in the red and blue spectrum to use that for photosynthesis, and they're actually emitting the far red. And so in addition to just simply having reduced quantity of sunlight, the quality underneath tree canopies are a lot less, because that's not a photosynthetically active spectrum, the far red, and it actually causes physiological changes in that turf, where the turf will then try to stretch, or what we call etiolate, to find sunlight, and it really makes it much more susceptible to mower damage when that happens. I really like the use of Sunseeker app. There are other apps out there that are helpful. The one that I used in my career was the Sunseeker. You can use it in what's called 3D mode, where you can take a picture of the adjacent environment and actually see the sun's path throughout the day, and then throughout any day of the year. And this happens to be the winter solstice, which is December 21st, and that's an important date for us because that's the day of the lowest amount of sunlight, and it's the day when the sun sets lowest in the horizon. So trees are much more important. As we get more into the summer months, the sun takes a direct angle overhead, and trees aren't as important with regard to sunlight. They are with air circulation at that time of year, but not so much sunlight. And so these are great tools to help really show how much sunlight is being removed and which trees are the most problematic for a given location for any time of the year. And why that's important is because research has shown that the ultra-dwarf Bermuda grasses, but particularly tiff eagle, which is used a lot here in our region, needs 8 hours of full sunlight a day to maintain optimum turf health and playability. Other tools that are going to be very helpful, they're helpful for us all year, but particularly in an El Nino winter, because we really want to monitor that soil moisture, are what we call TDR probes. And whether it's the Spectrum TDR or it's the POGO, you want something that measures volumetric water content, and that's how much water is in that upper root zone where your roots are. There is no ideal number that's good for the entire region. With these tools, you want to use them that are specific to your location. But if you're using them year after year, they're a great tool to at least explain how much water now is in our soil that we can't get rid of, and why practices like venting are helpful, because it helps with that evaporation process and helps get oxygen down to the roots. Black sand top dressing or green sand, dark green, so dyed sands, they're a bit of a controversial issue with some superintendents. I have found them to be great tools for our region, and this picture that you see actually started me on this idea of dark sands, and it was a superintendent in Fort Myers who sent me this picture and said, Todd, I think dark sands might be something that we need to look a little bit more at. And the old timers would use charcoal in winter months, and I think both of them do a very similar thing. But why you see these goofy little circles all over this particular green is the superintendent wanted to, kind of give the ladies a nice event. They were having a jungle-themed ladies' day, a ladies' tournament, and so he took black sand and put it. He tried to create kind of like a cheetah spots around the whole location on this particular green. Well, he did it on a couple of greens, and then this was in early March when the tournament took place. In mid-March, the temperature dropped and turned all the turf the yellow color that you see, except for in the areas where the dark sand was applied. And so I think it had a lot to do with solar radiation increase heat in that canopy. We've done research at the University of Florida to show, we really don't have much of a deleterious effect. There's a lot of superintendents that aren't crazy about it because I'll show you here in a minute. We actually can see that layer that the dye has left behind for many years, actually. But here's pictures from, they had them in 3 different locations that this trial was replicated. The picture on the left is from the location up in Jay, Florida, where it got really cold, and you can see the black sand, and then the white sand and even charcoal compared to the untreated check. But the picture next to it was actually from the plots, I believe the plots in Fort Lauderdale, and the coloration that you see, the white, is where it actually was warmer due to the darker sands, whereas the purple was where the white sand top dressing was applied to, that actually reflected the heat, and those plots were colder and therefore more off color. So I like it for those reasons that you literally see in these pictures. But superintendents, again, haven't been, the most supportive of it. And, I hear the same thing at a lot of golf courses where, like, Todd, I'm just not crazy about the layers that we see for many years. And so it's funny, I a bit of a turf nerd. I take a lot of pictures of root zones, and so here's a particular root zone where I was actually just taking a picture of the great roots that were taking place that day. But as I went back and we're looking at images, I'm like, you know what? I'm actually seeing like 3 or 4 different green sand or black sand layers where it's not hurting the roots whatsoever. And according to Dr. Unruh, who did the trials, he said it was a visible layer that you could see, but in his opinion, they weren't physical layers that were causing a disruption in the infiltration or any negative side effects. So I've liked the practice of using dark. And if you don't like the dyed sands, then maybe just use charcoal. That's going to be better than nothing to help. But one of the things I wanted to talk about, because in 2016 I visited several new golf courses where you really saw the surface thinning that we normally get on perimeters, but at a much more accelerated pace in this El Nino year. And the reason being is because new putting greens, they lack that, I've always called it an organic pad, kind of like a pad underneath your carpet. Without it, it's going to be a very firm footing, and it's the same way with turf. One of the number 1 complaints on brand new greens is they're too firm. The balls bounce off like a trampoline. Well, it's because you need to have that new, that other year of maturation, and to get this more of an organic pad like you see in this bottom picture, year 2 of both thatch and brown organic matter. And on areas where you don't have an adequate pad developed, they're much more susceptible to stresses, particularly mechanical stresses from like lower mowing or from rolling. But those aren't the other stresses, just any stress. Shaded areas, which in a normal year don't cause surface thinning, in that first year will absolutely cause surface thinning. Also, entry and exit, ingress and egress points off of a green. Maybe if you have a bunker that concentrates wear into a certain area, it absolutely will cause more thinning. But it's always along those perimeters because of the cleanup passes that we do with both mowing and other cultural practices. And also that's an area where some heads, irrigation heads, will stop and start. And can cause more soil saturation in certain locations on some greens. And so here's on a normal or an average winter what we can expect with new greens, where they begin to kind of thin out in some of those areas, whether it's a low-lying area like this picture shows, or again shaded, or a high traffic area. For whatever reason, you're going to have more stress. But boy, in that El Nino winter, this is a picture from a visit I did at a golf course nearby, where it really, the greens just take it on the chin, and so you just get much more accentuated traffic stress along those perimeters. So what can we do? Well, to the extent possible, let's maybe look at fewer mowings on the perimeters. I think just keeping recognition that your perimeters are always the most susceptible to wear. And so even like I was saying earlier, with some practices like smooth rolling or lightweight rolling, maybe not go all the way out to the edges, maybe stop several feet from the perimeters. It's a different way of maintaining, I get it, but there are courses that do it and do it successfully. So it's a good practice that you can incorporate. But just whatever we need to do, and if you need to adjust heads to make sure that they're going all the way off of the putting surfaces and not stopping on some of those edges, you might want to look at fine tuning your irrigation as well. And here's some wear patterns that you can get off of the edges, like I was saying earlier with rolling, and that's what this picture on the left shows, where those collars, because I'm standing in a very much lower elevation when I took this. So why I'm saying that is, the normal areas where we start and stop rollers is right on those collars or out into the roughs. Well, they can't go out into the roughs in this area because the surface elevation drops off considerably, and your rollers would just continue to move on downhill. And then, and it's not just from rolling. Here's a picture on the right that I actually took at a golf course last year, where that collar was actually in excellent condition, but they mow the collars with a triplex unit, and you can really see the wear from the mowers, from those collar mowers getting onto the putting green. So there's a lot of mechanical wear that occurs for different reasons. And then, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about turf diseases. This time of year is our normal kind of disease window that we get. We're putting a lot more stress on those greens with the amount of play we get, but it's mostly due to the weather conditions. And for all of us turf, folks that studied turf in college, we know this disease triangle that I'm showing you here with the host and the environment and the pathogen. You need to have the right amounts of each, and we always have a host, and sometimes our pathogens build up over time. But you got to have that right environment for disease to really show itself. And so our normal, usual suspects, if you will, for our winter play season would be Pythium, both Pythium blight and Pythium root rot, take-all root rot, which we have historically called Bermuda grass decline, and leaf spot. We're seeing a little bit more microdocium. I probably could have put in pink patch or cream leaf blight. And, there's some other ones that seem to be popping up. There seems to be newer pests all the time. But the top three that we normally get would be the Pythium, leaf spot, and take-all root rot. And I wanted to show this. This is from Dr. Phil Harmon at University of Florida. He gave a presentation for us back in 2020 where I asked him, if you don't mind, could you show like a normal calendar year based on your historical data? And I think this was probably at the time may have been 7 or 8 years worth of turf diagnostics. So at the University of Florida lab, they have the rapid turf diagnostics, and they take in samples. And so the diseases that you see by month, are here laid out. And you can see really most months of the year we could be getting diseases like, say, Pythium root rot or take-all root rot, bipolaris, leaf spot, or melting out. They normally occurs kind of, again, in the cooler months. But really what I wanted to show you is, look at the number one month for all diseases, except for maybe Pythium root rot, but it's right up there next to it, and that's January. So I show that to be that's a difficult time of year for us, and so I show all that to say, have a good fungicide program, and be applying those a little bit more frequently as the environment again becomes more conducive for disease. So as we stay even wetter and fewer days of sunlight, you might want to be looking at increasing that fungicide frequency to maintain good prevention. And that really is it's not just a cliche. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure is so important, because if you can prevent a disease from occurring and you prevent ugly turf conditions like you see here in this picture on the right, you can maintain much better quality. If it gets to this condition in January, boy, it could take 6 to 8 weeks to fully recover because of the low temperatures that are not allowing aggressive turf growth at that time. So also, you want to choose fungicides that have good abiotic stress mitigation, because, boy, there's a lot of abiotic stresses, the low sunlight, the increased saturation of soil that's giving us low oxygen, shade, well, I mentioned the low sunlight, but more traffic stress. These are all stresses that are what we call abiotic, and that they're not pathogen stresses, they're non-living. And so if you have fungicides with good abiotic stress mitigation, you'll help weather the storm that much better. Tees, fairways, and roughs, and I apologize already. I'm going to show this picture multiple times because it's a great picture, and it's a picture that occurred during the 2016 El Nino. It's not a great picture, but it's a good picture of what happened and what could happen, on our golf courses. But before I get into the fairways and roughs, a normal stress area for us is going to be teeing grounds, but more importantly, small tees, just due to the wear stress that they incur. And so here's a golf course I used to visit a lot where very small tees remain just beaten up, and they renovated, nearly increased the size of that tee by 3 times the size. You can see they're still getting a lot of play, but they're now able to move that play over a larger area and not go completely thin like you saw, or like you see in the picture on the right. And then shade, that's a normal stress that we get on tees, especially during the winter play season. Here's a tee on a nice golf course with zoysia grass, because zoysia grass is the most shade tolerant grass, but even zoysia grass can't take the conditions that we have under complete tree canopy shade, and especially with the lower sunlight that we're going to get if we get repeated rainfalls with the El Nino winter. But some of the most important observations we made during the previous El Nino is that the normal traffic patterns and wear that we get in a normal winter play season was so much more exacerbated when the conditions got completely saturated, and we saw more tire rutting. This leads to more compaction because you got more or wear going over that saturated condition, and the organic matter that causes this whole dynamic of issues is the organic matter that's in the soil. When you run over that with more and more cart traffic or any traffic, it really compacts and kind of smears that upper root zone to where it seals off, and then again can cause root issues just from that. But overall, just poor turf color and quality that we can get, and that's the picture that you see there in the middle, where it's lost so much chlorophyll because we've stayed so cold and we've had so many days of very low sunlight. It really stresses that turf out, and particularly the common Bermuda grass patches that we have on all golf courses. And then the number one just complaints that golfers had at every visit in that year, and that's the increased mud balls and plug lies that we get. So again, here's the last time I'm going to show this picture. It's pretty ugly, so I want to get away from it. But what I just want to show is that we can expect, and why I'm showing this, and maybe there's other regions that get like this, but this is in South Florida where, for the most part, you would see overall green conditions, except for in the very high traffic areas, you will see browner conditions, but not where it's large-scale chlorosis or turf yellowing. I wrote an article back in 2011 that discussed the use of pigments. That was the year we saw the first really great pigment that came to the market, and it wasn't long, and we saw a lot of additional pigments that came out. But I had a golf course down in Naples, funny enough, that was the same year we had one of the coldest winters on record, where even the roughs went straw brown dormant just from color loss. And so this great, very innovative superintendent, I'll go ahead and say it, Stuart Bodie, he was at Vanderbilt, but then he's now moved on, but great superintendent doing some innovative things all the time. And he tried just putting out liquid fertilizers, because that's the number one thing a superintendent will tell you. Well, I maintain good green color with fertilizers, and you can, particularly with things like manganese or iron. You can highly enhance your turf color and quality, but not to the level of adding that pigment. And so he had a few fairways where he looked at fertilizers only, and then those where he had fertilizers in the pigment, and you can clearly see what the pigments can do for you. I've always been a big fan of them. So cart traffic is a difficult stress for golf courses in any winter, but so much more exaggerated in an El Nino winter, because we're getting, again, increased rounds on semi-dormant turf. And what you're seeing here, that's the end of a cart path where I'm not sure if this is ingress or an egress, but it's a cart path end, as you can see. So carts are coming to this area or leaving from this area. And what happens is the tires just wear that canopy off. And so all the green leaf tissue eventually just gets worn off. And the brown coloration that you're seeing is actually the underlying stems underneath that green canopy. And so that's the initial symptoms of excessive cart traffic wear. But you actually get more than that with a buildup of soil compaction over time, especially if you've got sands that are made, or I'm sorry, soils that are made up of heavier soils such as clays, or fine textured sands even will become compact pretty easy. But there again, the organic matter that's within that upper root zone, because we don't maintain roughs and fairways to the same degree that we do putting greens and teeing grounds. So you get a lot more of the undiluted organic matter that accumulates in the upper root zone, and it really can cause additional compaction issues, particularly in the high traffic areas. And again, here's just the same kind of traffic, but now in a much more saturated condition, and it just really causes a lot of poor conditioning. And especially, ever since COVID, where we had a lot of the single rider carts, and I knew that was Pandora's box, and I knew it was going to be difficult to get back doing the right things that we need to do. And what am I talking about? We need to limit the number of carts that are out on that golf course. So if you have a foursome and you got 4 golf carts, that's essentially doing twice the number of rounds as you are, in a normal type situation. So if we can limit cart traffic, that would be wonderful. And down here in Florida, we only have a few golf courses that are true walker golf courses where the people are walking, and you will get similar wear patterns, but a much more micro level. But obviously up around putting greens, if you have caddies and just walkers moving in the same area all the time, you will get the same kind of issues, but on a much smaller scale. And again, when you remain so wet, you're going to have much more tire rutting that's going to occur. But these could be great opportunities to make a list of some of these areas that may stay very saturated, and maybe these are areas that you might want to improve with some summertime drainage projects. But managing golf cart traffic or golfer traffic, it's really difficult. We do the best we can with things like ropes and stakes. Nobody likes them, including myself, but you know what? They're helpful. And around tees and greens, I love the use of curbs because it keeps golfers from wanting to put 2 wheels onto that turf area and really accentuate turf wear. But to the extent that we can communicate, we really need to. We need to communicate the amount of wear and the amount of care we can take by not going in the same areas all the time. And so whether it's ropes and stakes, probably the most effective cart traffic management are the golf carts that have the GPS units. And you and I both have been in those carts, and we say a little cuss word when those things start stopping and it's in an area you shouldn't be going. But hey, they are effective, and it keeps people from going into those areas. I'm 50-50 on the use of these directional stakes. So on a hole that has a cart path, you would use something that maybe have a green color to let people know this is where you can enter the hole, and then the picture on the right shows this is where you want to leave the hole. Because why I'm saying 50-50, it does reduce the amount of traffic that you have throughout the roughs, but boy, it really concentrates the amount of traffic you have in those given areas. As the picture on the left shows, you can get those tire marks just really aggressive, where it removes that green leaf tissue rather quickly. So if you're not rotating these posts on a pretty regular basis, you're going to have rather concentrated wear patterns take place. I really have found the resting hole program to be very effective, but as this picture shows, not everyone looks at signs, and so that's the downside of programs, is when they don't do what they're supposed to. And anyway, but a resting hole program is really effective. Even in our cold winter play seasons, I have found just giving each hole a week rest, and that's what a resting hole program does. So holes number 1 and number 10 would be cart path only on week 1, and then week 2 they would rotate to holes number 2 and 11, and you just keep going forward. And the par 3 holes are skipped because you're not supposed to be riding on those anyway. To the extent that you can relieve compaction with some slicing or venting, that's great. Just know that some implements are better than others. You don't want to use a lot of these implements that can cause scarring, and if you do, really concentrate the areas that you use it in and not use it throughout, because they can cause some greater aesthetic issues from just the practice alone. The mud balls and plug lies, that was number one issue with the golfers in 2016, whereas all the other issues were more important for turf managers. But that mud, it's actually undiluted organic matter. And with the continued rains that we get in the low ET, it's going to keep the fairways soft and spongy, and you're going to have more of those mud balls occurring. But I had found fewer mud balls and plug lies on golf courses that really got after that organic matter in the summer months. So again, just a reason why nobody likes seeing this in the summer, but the more you can do this, the better conditions you're going to have in your peak play season. But I tell you, the number one practice that if you want to eliminate, and I don't mean decrease, but if you want to eliminate mud balls and plug lies, it's sand top dressing. Now, this is not an inexpensive practice, but it's one that will pay huge dividends even in just 1 year. And I had a golf course that I visited many years ago where mud balls and plug lies were just an issue all the time that they wanted to improve upon. So I visited back in 2004. I made the recommendations that they should consider sand top dressing. By 2006, we had an inch of sand developed in that upper root zone, and their plans were to continue that practice. But then 2007 and 8 hit, and what was that timing? That was the time of the financial downfall that we had in our in our economy. And what happened was they stopped top dressing, and you can see that what had happened is that nice sand layer that was continuing was immediately halted because the turf then continued to grow that organic matter, but we weren't diluting it anymore with sand. And so by 2013, I was invited back into the golf course with the same issues, with a new superintendent, but now the same issues that they had way back when, of the mud balls, plug lies. And again, if you just continue that sand top dressing, you will maintain much firmer playing conditions and fewer of those issues altogether. Disease prevention is generally something for Bermuda grass that we're not spraying for regularly in a normal winter, although in a normal winter, if the environment is conducive, if it gets those moderate soil temperatures, not too cold, not too warm, those moderate soil conditions with more soil saturation and canopy moisture, you will get more diseases. And generally the large patch and leaf spot are kind of the two that we normally get, but generally not treated for. But in an El Nino winter where we're staying really wet, we can have large patch look pretty bad on a lot of golf courses. So it might be something you want to consider. And we did some trial work a few years ago on some fairways, and we really found some great responses, not just in disease control, but with our fungicide line having the stress guard pigment, really found great results in abiotic stress mitigation. And so I just wanted to show these, and this is as commercial as we get with these, because the product itself has a pigment in it, but what that pigment does, or what the formulation does, it actually enhances chlorophyll stabilization, and it keeps chlorophyll from wanting to degrade, and actually helps make more chlorophyll under stress turf conditions. And so the picture on the left is from a golf course over in the Palm Beach area 12 days after the second application. And why that's important is because any pigment that was applied with the actual application would have been mowed off by that time, and certainly by 21 days after the third application. But you can see a much better coloration. Again, I've always been a fan of using pigments, period, but especially pigments that enhance turf quality and actual health of the turf. And here's a golf course that was in the Vero Beach area where we visited, and they had done 2 applications of a product, and the piece in the middle was left untreated. And what had happened in this particular instance, they had a mower damage from scalping, and where it was treated had recovered at twice the speed as where it was left untreated. So really great abiotic stress mitigation. Well, I showed you some of the unfortunate side effects we can get with tree shade, but tree roots are just as problematic as the shade, and particularly where you have cart traffic. And so you can literally see the tree roots extending from the other side of the cart path into that high traffic area and really cause additional disruption in turf quality. And so if you can get in there and prune those roots back every so often, here's a golf course where I had said if you could get on the side of the cart path, and really if they had done the left side of that cart path, they could have bought 4 more years. But you can clearly see the line about a foot in from that cart path on the left side of it, where it's darker green turf. Even though it's still shaded, and even though it still gets traffic, just being able to sever those tree roots, you're able to maintain green turf color versus the brown and even dirt, as you can see in this picture, from those tree roots just sucking the life out of that turf. But this next picture is really the one that I'm probably most proud of when it comes to tree root competition. It was at a golf course where I had questioned why somebody would spray squares around trees with Roundup, to which I got a very puzzled look by the superintendent. And he said, well, I don't know, why would you think I'm spraying squares around the trees out here? I said, well, I'm just, it looks like you sprayed some type of herbicide. And he said, no, that's from where we prune the tree roots. So the brown turf that you're seeing inside that square is simply from root competition, literally sucking the life out of that turf. And where they were able to sever the roots, they had much greener and healthier turf. So if you can do this every year, or at least every other year, you can really help maintain much better turf quality and health. And again, in an El Nino winter, these conditions just get amplified. They're going to look even worse where it's brown. And then lastly, among all the playing surfaces that we have, bunkers aren't considered a play surface, but we certainly do get a lot of play in bunkers, and they are aesthetics features on golf courses. And here's a picture that I took from that winter where we just had so much rainfall. And here you can see there's no evaporation taking place in that bunker. They're literally having to suck the moisture out of that bunker with with these dirt pumps, mud pumps. And so what does that mean, Todd? Well, I mean, obviously we're going to get more siltation that's going to show up, and you're going to have a worse aesthetic feature from it. If you had bunkers that maybe have durable liners, they're going to generally remain more firm and even more open to algae formation. If you don't have durable liners, because durable liners are put in to help maintain sand on steep faces. So if you don't have those liners and you have a lot of steep faces, if you get some heavy downpours in the winter months, you're going to have more sand migrating off of those faces. And every time you put the sand back on the faces, the sand's always going to be softer. So if you have durable liners, it could be more firm playing conditions that you're going to have. If you don't have them, you could have softer playing conditions. But either way, you're going to have conditions that are going to be a lot less aesthetic. And that's what bunkers are generally used for, that and just hazards to play. And so I have a summary slide, in both, whether it's the greens or the tees, fairways, roughs, communication is key. And I'm hoping that I armed everyone with the right kinds of information that you can take back to your membership and communicate well, and maybe reduce the amount of grumbling that we get. Superintendents have a hard enough time keeping golf courses looking good and playing well. And so, having to do that and also deal with a lot of complaints is, it just gets old and difficult on superintendents. But raising the mowing heights, I probably should have made that 3 times the size of the font. That's one of the best things you can do for putting greens at this time of year as we're going into this difficult time, and give those roots a fighting chance to get deeper, so that when we get stressed, we've got more of a reserve, a carbohydrate reserve for those plants to take from. Target rolling, consider that. Obviously, venting regularly, great practice. Increase your fungicide frequency versus having longer windows of application to help keep preventing diseases from ever becoming an issue. You want to protect those new green perimeters, so that's decreasing mechanical stress, and then really being careful of your entry exit points, irrigation head distribution, and shade. Speaking of shade, just using the Sunseeker app, it's a great tool. Soil moisture with these wetter conditions, you know, for nothing else, just monitor and document and see the success, hopefully, of doing things like venting, or there's another practice called the Air 2 G2, or deep pencil tining. These are all things we can do to help vent those potting greens. And then in the summertime, if you have issues with surface flow, reducing those collar elevations through either you know, taking a sod cutter or some other implement to remove the elevation. And then tees, fairways, roughs. I mean, the biggest issue is going to be the mud balls. There's unfortunately nothing we can do at that point. But if you do find that you want a more firm playing condition, the summertime sand top dressing is a great practice. Relieving soil compaction as much as you can without causing too much surface disruption from the practice would be a great thing that, you know, to consider. And also hopefully give you some appreciation of why we have to do some of the summertime cultivation and sand top tricking that we do, you know, on putting greens. Nobody likes doing it, but there's a reason why we do it, and that's to increase internal drainage. Pigments can help on all playing surfaces. Large patch and leaf spot on tees, fairways, and roughs are more of a problem during the El Nino winters, so you may want to consider utilizing a fungicide program or at least a couple of applications. And then summertime tee expansion, if you get tees that just stay too thin, that's something you may want to consider anyway, but especially, you know, in this kind of winter, you may have more of those issues, and particularly, you know, with bunker issues as well. So if there's long-term improvements that you may want to do, not much we can do with either one of those once we hit season. But that's it. Here's my information. If I can be of any help to you, I know, again, this isn't really a technical talk for the products that we provide you guys, but I just wanted to try to help our industry of golf courses and the golf course community. Hopefully we don't need any of this information to reach the memberships, but you know, if we have a difficult winter, I think, you know, maybe sending this link to some of the members out there would be helpful. But that's it for me. Thanks, guys.